Welcome to Southern Steep, the public health and social justice podcast brought to you by NASTAD, a nonprofit, nonpartisan association mission to end the intersecting epidemics of HIV, viral hepatitis, and related conditions. Much like brewing stronger tea, this platform aims to brew a stronger community by centering community leaders' voices and their innovative work in the Southern United States.
I'm Isaiah Webster, and I'm joined here today by Nicole Elenoff. Nicole, how are you?
You know, it reunited and it feels so good. This is our first time seeing each other really since our break. This is my first podcast recording since the break and just really happy to be here. How are you?
I am good. It's good to see you and Happy New Year. This is our first recording together in the new year. I don't know if you can hear in my voice, but I have a little bit of congestion that I've been working through. And of course, as you know, the entire country is really suffering through COVID these days. And so whenever you get any sort of congestion whatsoever, the mind immediately goes to the worst places. But I am okay on that front. But I am dealing with some congestion. So I apologize to the listeners that my normal, amazing voice isn't here. We'll just have to make do.
You know, luckily for all of us, I think your voice sounds wonderful, nasally or not. I always have a case of the nasals, so you're in good company.
So if you've been listening to the podcast through the first two seasons, you know that we like to center our conversations around the community-based organizations and community leaders that NASTAD is working with. I want to remind you, as we always do, to visit nastad.org to learn about our organization and all the amazing work that we do, both with health departments and with CBOs. We normally invite on guests from community. I mean, in other words, it's rare that we have folks that work at NASTAD with us to be on this show because we really like to center community voices. However, NASTAD is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, and we thought it would be a really good opportunity to highlight the work we do with stakeholders and community and how it's really informed the past 3 decades of our existence. And so today we've invited on a very special guest. I can say that because she's my boss and she's worked at NASTAD for many, many years. She is one of our deputy executive directors. Her name is Natalie Cramer. I believe, Nicole, you have her bio in front of you that we can maybe read before we hear from her.
Absolutely. So Natalie Cramer is the Deputy Executive Director of NASTAD, and she oversees NASTAD's 6 programmatic teams, the SIBO prevention team, drug user health, healthcare access, health equity, health systems integration, hepatitis, and communications. In the Deputy Executive Director role, she plays central role in the strategic direction and management of the organization. She has over 25 years of experience working in public health at the state and national levels with a focus on HIV prevention and drug user health, including over 11 years working for the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. Natalie received her master's in science and social work from the University of Texas at Austin with a specialization in community administration and leadership and a bachelor's of arts in art history from Bates College.
Thanks, Nicole. So hello, Natalie. How are you?
I am well, thanks. How are you?
We are great. So before we get into our questions for you, is there anything about that bio that you feel that bio is pretty accurate, correct? Based on what just hearing it this time right here.
Yeah, it is. It is pretty accurate. We are in the process, as you guys know, of realigning NASTAD around our new strategic plan. So there are a few tweaks to that, but I would say it is pretty solid. So thank you.
Have you ever done a podcast before?
I have not done a podcast before.
This is great, Nicole. We got her.
So glad that we can be your first time.
So Natalie, you and I have worked together now for 10 years. You've been at NASTAD longer than I have, but we've been paired together for my duration. And Nicole and I thought it would be a great kind of icebreaker if we could just start there with kind of like our synergy and working relationship. Can I share a story with you?
Please.
So Nicole, I don't think I ever told you this. So I want to tell you and the listeners the first time I ever met Natalie Cramer. I remember everything about this encounter. It was an interview, obviously. And back then we did really, Natalie, you'll remember this, we did really long, kind of like almost like these half-day marathon interviews. And Natalie was one of, I think, 7 people I met with during my interview. But she wasn't the first person. She was actually towards the end because of just the way that the schedules aligned. And so I go into what was then the annex, and Natalie's in her office, and she's sitting behind this desk. And for those of you that have never met Natalie, she's kind of reserved and a little bit quiet and kind of, small in stature. And so I walk in and I'm all loud and, and I'm like, hey. And she's like, hello. And I was like, oh, wow. So I had to dial it back because I didn't want to scare her. And so we had a really good conversation. But when I left, I was like, wow, she's so different from me. I don't know how this is going to go. Natalie, what do you remember about that very first encounter we had?
So this is really making me smile. So I similarly remember that first encounter. And what I most remember about that, is feeling like it was a really good interview. And then we got to the end and I said, do you have any questions for me? And you said, no, just like that. And I thought, like, who does that in an interview, right? Like, just, most people just make up a question at least or something. And I remember that just like noting that. But, I remember, so that's what I remember. And I actually remember talking with some of the other interviewers who said, a few of them, at least one of them had that same experience, and we were both sort of shaking our heads, but we said, it was a great interview. And it's true. He had talked to a lot of other folks. And so, like feeling very positively about you and the rest is history, right? Here we are 10 years later.
One of the things I remember about our very first encounter is your ability to actively listen. You took in almost everything I said, and at certain points you would reference things later in the conversation that I had mentioned to you. And one of the things I took away from that is she's a really good listener. She recalls things within a conversation, and I can tell that she made a mental note of that. And in the last 10 years, same thing. Like, every time I tell you something, you always come back to it at some point later. So the active listening is one of the things that I've really learned from you in the time that we have worked together. So Nicole, you and I on the other end of the spectrum have just known each other for a little over a year.
We're almost at 2.
Has it been 2 years?
We started talking, in March. So happy almost 2-year anniversary.
Oh, wow. Time really does fly.
Time flies when you're in a pandemic. Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna hand it over to Nicole for the first kind of series of questions here that we have for you, Natalie.
Well, I just want to say though, just knowing you both, I can totally see how that whole story played out. And, after a series of a long day, having no as your last thing, I could see that totally. Natalie, you've had a really impressive public health career. As we mentioned in your bio, you've spent a meaningful amount of time at the Massachusetts Department of Health, but you've also been at NASTAD for quite a while. What has kept you wanting to be within this national space? Can you tell us a little bit more about, this drive that you have at NASTAD?
Thanks, Nicole. That is a great question. So obviously, yeah, I love working at NASTAD. I have been here as a little bit over 15 years. And, it's interesting. I mean, I think that many of the things that brought me to NASTAD are really what have kept me at NASTAD. So I first became familiar with NASTAD when I was working in Massachusetts there. Certainly impressed by the innovative work that NASTAD was doing at that time to really mobilize health departments and governmental public health. And then, realized really through my service there as a public employee, the importance of serving in that way, and really was excited about taking that to a membership organization that has a similar mission around serving our members. Sort of within that is just really believing in the role of governmental public health and the way in which it can develop and implement policies and programs that change people's lives for better. And, I think one of the things that is inherent to HIV and to hepatitis and our drug user health work is the ways in which that is really needs to happen synergistically in dialogue with community. And I think has sort of been part and parcel of how HIV work has been approached. And when we see it at its most effective, it is there. But really, within thinking about this from sort of what can you do at the state or local or national level from a governmental public health, it really has always felt to me like it's where there's a will, there's a way, and it is about the different roles that we have to play and who you're bringing to the table. That has been certainly one of the things that has kept me at NASTAD.
Our members are definitely a really special aspect of, the organization and the work that we do, and getting an opportunity to meet and connect with these members and see how, the work that NASTAD is doing really helps them with their work is just such a special piece. So that's great to hear that one of, your main drivers is also one of my main drivers too. So that's really great. As you've probably reflected, a lot over this last, couple of months as we enter, our 30th anniversary, you've been with the organization for about half of that. What do you think has been one of your proudest moments or accomplishments as NASTAD reaches 30?
And you don't have to say hiring Isaiah.
What a win.
I don't know if there is a single moment. I mean, I will say, the other thing that has kept me at NASTAD is the amazing NASTAD staff. I think, we have an incredibly talented group of folks that are what make this a terrific place to work and are, what allows us to be so successful. So terrific colleagues who's coming to NASTAD I've had a role in. It is certainly something I feel really pleased about. I don't know if there is a single piece that I feel most proud about, but I can talk about a few different things that I think are significant. One of them is NASTAD's drug user health work. So that is an area, NASTAD in its full, 30 years has always been an advocate for harm reduction and harm reduction approaches. And that was an area that I, as you heard in my bio, had done some work on in Massachusetts, both from a program policy and data standpoint. And it was an area that when I came to NASTAD to work in our prevention program, I was really interested in continuing to have NASTAD lead in that area, and was really excited to explore relationships on the national level, make sure that NASTAD was a consistent, unwavering, and strong voice around harm reduction and drug user health. And so we brought on our first fellow, a drug user health fellow, and that was really the very first dedicated staff person that we had that was focused on drug user health. And then when that fellowship ended, we realized that there was enough, certainly enough work that we needed this to be a permanent position. And so we hired our first manager. And as you guys know, now we have a really significant drug user health team working on 2 large cooperative agreements, including the Harm Reduction Technical Assistance Center. I would say one I feel like that is some work that I personally feel really proud about being involved in supporting in some ways, but I think also is a good example of the way that our programmatic work has grown and evolved at NASTAD, starting in innovative yet practical ways to begin to grow and develop that, and just sort of being willing to trust and allow this to evolve strategically as necessary.
Natalie, as you know, I've been a trainer for many, many years, more than 20 at this point. And I've been at NASTAD for 10 years. And I remember what it was like standing in front of a group of people as a trainer before I came to NASTAD. And I remember the first time I stood up as a member of the NASTAD team and said that I was with NASTAD. And I can remember the way that people kind of stiffened up in their chair and really leaned into what I was saying. I immediately noticed that being affiliated with this particular organization what gave me immediate credibility. And when I think about our 30-year anniversary, I think about all of the work that you and my other colleagues have done to really cultivate that. When I talk to community, even if they're not as well versed in our programs in the way that you just articulated it, they still have a very good sense of NASTAD, and they sense that we are a quality, credible source of HIV information. And to me, when I think about a 30-year kind of look back, I go back to this feeling of standing up in that meeting room and saying, I'm Isaiah, I'm with NASTAD, and just kind of the way that people immediately kind of like embraced me as a source, as a credible source of information. And to me, that's not a credit to me, but to the organization and to the folks and the work that you kind of referenced. I wanted to shift a little bit to talk a little bit about our kind of current commitments and kind of like the current way that we are comporting ourselves and advancing our mission. I wanted to talk specifically about our anti-racism efforts. And so for those of you listening to this podcast, as a part of our strategic plan, as a part of just the work that we're doing internally, the organization has really committed itself to looking at dismantling systems of white supremacy and racism, and really being focused and intentional about that work. And our executive director, Stephen Lee, and Natalie, and really an array of people, both on the board and on staff, are committed to this work. Natalie, when we think about community folks, when we think about such a huge thing as anti-racism, I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about in your mind what this really means for folks that work at NASTAD, and particularly what it means for white people, because I think it's important. I'm a Black gay man. We talked about it on this show many times, and so my kind of lens about anti-racism is one way. I think there's a lot of value in the conversations and that non-people of color are having. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and a little bit about just NASTAD's commitment to anti-racism in general.
NASTAD has a long commitment to social justice and to help and to health equity. And I think, that has been part of our staffing and programming at NASTAD for as long as I have been here. And it has been, I think, a really powerful piece of NASTAD's work. And I think, as we know at this point, what is fueling the HIV, and I think we can add to that the hepatitis and other intersecting epidemics really is structural racism and stigma, and can add to that other systematic oppressions. What do you do to dismantle that in public health that will make a difference? So, and I think that is really exciting. I think sort of like the next vanguard of the activities that NASTAD is doing. Well over decades now, we have convened meetings and conversations. We have developed, issue briefs and white papers. We have some degree of facility with talking about conversations about race and racism. What else can we do, and what can we do to confront and dismantle this, and shift power, and examine our privilege? And that is really the work that NASTAD is doing now. So we are looking across all aspects of our work, but really investing in training for all staff and board members around anti-racism and anti-white supremacy approaches, and how that shows up in our work that we are doing internally with our colleagues, and work that we are doing in programs that we are working in. We are looking at all aspects of NASTAD's policies, examining those with an anti-racism lens. And reflecting on what that means and where we need to make changes. We are looking at that through our hiring and recruiting and compensation practices. We are examining that with the contracts that we are putting out, as well as contracts with businesses that we are taking on. We are looking to examine, we look at that as we think about, new funding opportunities and directions that we might go in. Policies that we are, like national policies that we are advocating for. We are, being bold, advocating and acknowledging racism as a public health crisis.
Totally. Now, Natalie, you referenced Chair's Challenge. So for our listeners, if you're unfamiliar with that, the chair of the NASTAD board serves for a year typically, and their Chair's Challenge is really their platform for their term. And it's really a challenge to their peers who are also either who are NASTAD members or part of our board of directors. And so that's what the Chair's Challenge refers to. And it's generally an issue or a set of issues that's either very important to that particular chairperson or for the organization at that moment in time. Natalie, I really appreciate you tying that answer back to our long-term health equity work, because it reminded me of two things. First, the intentionality around our board and the leadership we have around doing things that are hard or difficult. We've never shied away from that. The drug user health work that you referenced previously is a part of that. And we have a whole drug user health team now, but I can remember before that occurred. And I remember that, that was hard work. That was a real lift to get that off the ground. And a lot of people put a lot of hard work into that. And so, that didn't happen by just accident. It just didn't fall on our doorstep. There was a lot of intentionality behind that. When I first joined the organization in 2012, it was right after the board had put out this policy statement on gay men. Do you remember? And this was, I believe it may have been partially in response to some data that the CDC had shared showing that the rates among Black gay men and Latino gay men were truly bad. And so the organization, the board kind of got together and said, we need to do something about this. We need to galvanize what power we have to change this. They literally created a position on staff to focus on gay men's work. And for a time, we were kind of known as like, oh, NASTAD is kind of experts in gay men. I mean, I don't know if that's true, really. What was truer was that the board and the staff made a commitment to do this work. They went out and sought experts on the work. They were intentional about it in the same way that we've been intentional about drug user health, in the same way that right now we're being intentional about anti-racism. And so to me, the drug user health, the anti-racism, it's just a continuation of what the organization has always done. And when you said how we've always done health equity, it reminded me that we have been doing this work in different iterations really for decades. And right now, the intention, right now, the galvanization, right now, the challenge before us is this anti-racism work. And that's not the only thing that we're doing, but it's certainly among the most prominent, but it fits right in line with what we've been doing for many, many, many years.
Thank you. Yeah, I really agree with that. I mean, and, it's interesting, right? I mean, one of the things that I have thought about that is, in June of 2020 with George Floyd's murder, like there was this reckoning that the country was coming to, and we were in the midst of COVID. So everybody is, working remotely and, all of those different pieces. And so I, was hearing from a lot of people at other organizations that they were having, they were talking about race for the first time at work. Like what struck me was that, that NASTAD and, probably to a certain extent, HIV programs, we're probably at another point in that journey of having those conversations. I remember feeling like grateful that we had a foundation, but also really appreciating how much more we needed to do, and how much just like we are not there yet, right? That unless you are really like actively working to undo racism and stigma, then it's not enough, I guess, And so yes. So I think that I agree, very much agree with the point that you're making, and the importance of digging deep and remaining committed is like essential within that.
I really appreciate you sharing all of this, Natalie. As someone who is relatively newer to staff when June 2020 took place, it was really encouraging for me to see the organization take a meaningful next step and really be serious about our actions. And I also think that, it further speaks to what Isaiah was talking about earlier about the credibility, because not only are we talking about how antiracism is a public health issue, we're also working internally, like you were mentioning, across many aspects of the organization, just attributing to another way that we're walking the walk instead of just talking the talk. So it's been really great to see the growth in this process and also see everything that's soon to come. I'm going to pivot us a little bit to one of the things that we like to talk with all of our guests about, and that is, what you'd like to see for the South. You being located in the Austin, Texas area, what do you love about the South, and what do you want to see for the South?
I first moved to the South in 2004, and that was moving directly from Massachusetts to Austin, Texas, to go to grad school at the School of Social Work. There were many, many, many things I was struck by at that time, but certainly just sort of like bringing us back to 2004. So same-sex marriage had just been legalized in Massachusetts. I had the opportunity to be involved in, a lot of what I now know was really publicly progressive work at the health department. But at the time, I think I didn't fully appreciate what a privilege it was to be able to have some of that work happen so relatively easily. And so, so I say all of that to say, I'm still reminded when I, spend time in places like Boston or New York that you would just see really easily lots of, media ads on buses and on public transportation about HIV, about infectious diseases, that it was really notable and striking for me moving to Austin, which, considers it's a progressive area within the great state of Texas, to realize that those things did not exist in the same way, and that things that I had really taken for granted, those were harder battles to fight. And it made me understand it made me understand and appreciate stigma in a different way. And I think, the world is changing, right? Like there is more of a public presence around HIV, campaigns that are addressing homophobia and racism. I think you see that a little bit more. That's an area where we need to continue to create the kind of spaces and have the conversations and have the kind of support for people to be fully leading their lives in all areas and aspects. So at work, where they worship, where they play, like I think there's still opportunities to normalize some of that a bit more in the South. I'm like, what was your exact question? Was sort of like, what do I appreciate? I mean, there's so many things that I appreciate. There's lots of different ways that happens, in sort of like big and small ways. And I feel like I've seen things evolve, but I think that's the hope, right? There are like the wonderful things about regional differences, and cultural differences that we want to like hold on to. And then how can we hold on to that, fully support equality, dignity, the wholeness, the authenticity of everyone. So kind of balance those pieces.
All three of us are Southerners, so you do not have to in any way.
You don't need a dance. Like, we know what the South is doing.
I think Nicole has referred to herself as a Florida girl multiple times on this podcast. So we are all firmly Southerners. Before we let you go, I do want to share two things about you with the listeners, and I hope you don't mind, but there are two things that we have in common. So first, Natalie has an amazing sense of humor. I will not say that it's the same as mine, but I will say it's adjacent to mine. And you have to really get to know her first before she truly opens that window. But Natalie has an amazing sense of humor. And we share that in common. We also share in common, Natalie, a sweet tooth. We both love sweets. I want to get you on record. Natalie loves these stale Peeps. I don't want to talk about that, but I do want to get you on record because we often fight sometimes here about Halloween candy, and it's not Halloween season, but this is for the record. How do you feel about the candy corns and the harvest mix? Are you a yay or nay?
Oh, I am so team candy corn. And
do you like the pumpkins too?
Yes. I mean, my favorite really is something that they don't make every year. And it is the autumn mix. So and now I get confused, but there's the harvest mix and the autumn mix. And there's one that has pumpkins and then the both kinds of candy corn. But then there's one that also sometimes has like maple leaves and like some yellow and orange and
yes,
that's my favorite. They don't make that every year, but that is absolutely my favorite. I heard one of our NASTAD colleagues say that that candy corn equals edible crayons, and I
did you reprimand that person?
I mean, It just, it broke my heart a little bit.
I didn't even know the maple leaves were an option. So next fall, I will be on the lookout.
They really.
Natalie Cramer, Deputy Executive Director for NASTAD. We so appreciate you making time to be on this podcast. So thank you so much. Thank you for your service to NASTAD. Thank you for being a great colleague to us and a great supervisor to me. We appreciate you.
Thank you guys so much. This was super fun.
Thanks, Natalie. It was great.
I would love to know from your perspective as someone who is newer to this work, just hearing about the past 30 years. I mean, what stood out to you about that whole arc of kind of like where we came from?
I think when she was talking about the drug user health bit and the amount of intention that NASTAD and Natalie made to get that program, off the ground, but really running, and now I would say soaring, I think is so incredible because they noticed that these challenges are in existence, and they determined that they were determined to make a program out of it and go the next step, and really mobilizing resources. And I just think that's a big testament to the growth that NASTAD's had and our commitment as issues continue to grow and be more prevalent.
Yeah, and this podcast isn't really about us tooting our own horns. We really want to uplift the voices of community, but we also think it's important, like at this 30th year anniversary, to really kind of mark the work that so many of our predecessors have done. And even for the folks that are on staff now, for the folks that used to work here that no longer do, and for the folks that will eventually work here, I think it's so important to kind of look at kind of where you've been, where you've come from, and how that's going to inform the work going forward. I so appreciate that Natalie said, we're still figuring it out. We're not perfect. We're kind of, she didn't use this analogy, but sometimes we say at NASTAD that we're flying the plane and building it at the same time. And to me, Nicole, that's always meant we have to lean in. We don't have the answers, but we're going to work together and try to discover the answers, but we're not going to let the fear of not succeeding keep us from trying. And one of the greatest things about the organization, in my view, is that we constantly challenge ourselves to continue to kind of do better. And I think we welcome the voices of community. We hire from the community. And again, while not perfect, we really try as best we can to incorporate the views of community. And we've certainly done that in this anti-racism work. And I think that will continue
and grow and go beyond. Just thinking about our 30th anniversary, HIV has been around for 40 years. We're going to be coming up on 41 years soon. And so to have NASTAD be a part of 75% of that time, 30 of those 40 years, I think that's 75%. But just looking back at history is so important when we are in a movement, and HIV is a movement. Harm reduction is a movement. Viral hepatitis reduction is a movement. And so I think it's really beautiful to look back and look ahead as we continue to fight these intersecting epidemics.
All right. Well, I think it's time for us to get on out of here. I'm Isaiah Webster.
I'm Nicole Elenoff. Thanks for listening.